What's going on, guys? It's Nick here, back with another video. Today we have the third episode in our 15-part draft strategy series. So far we've taken a look at the robust RB strategy, the optimal time to draft a quarterback. Now we're looking at the optimal time to draft a tight end. There are fewer surprises in this video than there were in the last one, but honestly, it feels good when the data backs up your prior beliefs. So I am happy that things are looking normal at the tight end position. I'll say the same thing as I did in the last video as regards to the data. Please watch episode 1, the robust RB strategy, or look at the website, the running back article. Both those are going to go in depth as to where the data came from. But in short, we're looking at the success of 110,000 teams for each of the last 7 years. That gives us a total sample size of 770,000 teams, all 10 and 12 team leagues, no super flex, no tight end premium leagues are included. But again, look at those two sources if you want more information on where the data set came from. So when should we draft tight end? The data shows that teams who select a tight end in the first 5 rounds, but more on that, more specific in a second, just perform better on average. So that can just be like a blanket thing in your mind. In the first 5 rounds, if you take a tight end, you're going to do pretty solid. And actually no other round outside of that range produces a better than average playoff rate. There are, I believe it's round 10, and there might be like round 15 or so. If you're taking tight ends kind of in the later rounds, you can approach average and effectively be average. If you're off by like a very small amount, we can consider it average. But pretty much anything outside of the first 5 rounds, you do it later on, it's fine. You're not going to lose your league because you drafted your first tight end in like round 10 or something like that. But they're all negative. They're all worse than average. You're doing slight damage to your playoff rate. So that's a very simple takeaway from this video. First 5 rounds. But I'm going to say the lean is more towards rounds 2, 3, and 4, especially because there's just very little data that has come out of round 1. Obviously, you need to have a really, really valuable tight end to have an ADP in the top 12 or top 10 if you're including a 10-team league. So how many do we really have in the last 7 years? I mean, it's like 2015 Gronk and 2021 Kelsey. Like, there's just very few times where a tight end will be a first-round pick. And so you could see a lot of variance with that data. What if Gronk had gotten hurt in 2015? Now, both of them crushed. Both of them finished as top 2 tight ends. They produced 1 points per game. And that's why you see an above-average playoff rate for first-round tight ends. But if either one of them had even like a tight end 7 finish, something like that, UT success rate drop. And if we're looking at that much variance for one player, it hurts. And then when you also consider both of those picks worked out, they were still really solid picks, both finished top 2, and it still wasn't like a crazy high success rate. You have more success in the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th rounds. So for me, just looking at something like that and saying that even though the only 2 in the sample worked out, even looking at that, it's not even crazy successful. It's enough for me to say not the first round. So even though on average with these 2 both working out, yes, you're making the playoffs at a higher rate, I would just say in general, there's so much opportunity cost. And if they don't really work out, it hurts your team a lot. So I would say first round's a no for me. It's more rounds 2 through 4, with round 5 being totally fine, especially though, if you take a tight end in round 5 of a player whose ADP is rounds 3 or 4. So we'll see more on this in a second, but the lean is 2, 3, 4. They have the best success rates. If you're going to do it in round 5, it'd be nice if you got someone whose ADP was round 4. The worst time to select a tight end is rounds 7 and 8, with rounds 6 and 9 also resulting in pretty well below average playoff rates. I wasn't expecting to see such a steep decline in success, but it sort of makes sense overall. If you take a tight end in rounds 6, 7, 8, and 9, then one of 2 things very likely happen. Either you're left with the least desirable early mid, because, round I guess you could call that the mid round, but that early mid section of rounds 4, 5, 6, 7 kind of rounds, either you're left with the least desirable tight end option in that range, meaning other people took players in the 4th round, in the 5th round, they got the first stab at those elite options, you're kind of getting what they didn't want. So either that's happening, or you're likely reaching into a range of tight end that is very, very similar to the late round options. So if you're taking a tight end round 8 or round 9, unless you're doing so because a player with like a 5th or 6th round ADP dropped multiple rounds, which can happen, but on average is not happening, you're probably taking someone who's basically the same pick as someone going in rounds 10, 11, 12. And that just doesn't feel like a sharp thing to do. And the data suggests that just wait. If you've already waited until rounds 8, rounds 9, you've missed out on all the great options. The players you're going to draft in that range are not significantly better than what you can get like 3-4 rounds later. And at other positions, we do see drop-offs. And so why not take other positions before that drop-off happens and then just wait like a little bit longer to take tight end? Because think about it. If you are taking your tight end in round 6 or 7, you're not getting an elite option, or it's very unlikely you're getting an elite option. You're not the first to take in the middle rounds. Then you're like, okay, I'll wait until 8 or 9. Well, all the mid-round tight ends are gone. You're almost forcing tight ends onto your roster, and so you're just playing from behind at that point. I would not take one in this range. And I like this graphic that I'm showing on the screen now because it shows that we sort of have no idea what we're doing in the middle rounds, and it honestly backs up the idea of taking a tight end in rounds 2, 3, and 4, because even round 5 is a little bit dicey. These are the ADPs over the last 7 seasons of all the tight ends drafted in the top 9 rounds, looking at what their ADP was, at least for a round. And I used 12-team league round for this. Overall rank, so where they finished overall amongst tight ends that season, and then points per game rank. What was their points per game for tight ends in that season? As you can see, rounds 2 through 4 are dominant. We are extremely good at knowing which tight ends are going to produce high end numbers. We're very good at that because it's not that hard. Unless someone gets hurt, look at this season. You know for a fact Travis Kelce, Mark Andrews, these guys are going to have good years unless they get hurt. And we've seen year after year, there's only a few tight ends that go in the top 4 rounds. And when it happens, we know they're going to be heavily involved. The only chance that they have at busting is injury. It's just so easy to predict. But you basically have like a 50-50 chance of choosing a tight end 1, so just a top 12 option in rounds 5 through 9. And it doesn't really matter what round you're in. It's not like, oh, round 5 is solid, then you see a slight dip in 6, a dip into 7, a dip into 8, bottoms off at 9. Like, look at any one of these rounds, unless you guys are seeing something that I'm not seeing. Like, round 6 looks decent, but I don't think there's enough data on the screen right now to tell me that this round in particular is different than all the other rounds, that you have a better chance of hitting on like a high-end option, and you definitely have a low success rate at hitting on a top 3 option. That's another thing. Sure, you can hit on the tight end 8, 9, 10, but hitting on a top 3 option, which is like a true difference maker at the position, that's something that happens a lot in the first 4 rounds. It's not something that really happens in rounds 5 through 9. So it again gives a little more credence to the fact that if you miss out on the first 4 rounds, why are you targeting this range? All these guys are fine. You basically have a 50-50 shot of getting a starting option. Like, there are still incredible running backs, incredible quarterbacks, incredible wide receivers. To take a tight end in this range with this low success, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. And I think that the number one critique that people bring at this point when you tell them that is that, well, you hurt your team a lot. Like I kind of said before with tight end in the first round, which I agree with, you hurt your team a lot by taking one early if they don't work out. If you drafted Darren Waller last season, he played, 9 healthy games, you hurt your team a lot if you drafted him. And that's basically the big argument. And again, I agree with that in the first round, because in the first round, there are just unbelievable talents at running back and wide receiver. There is a massive opportunity cost, and there's still a really high opportunity cost in the second round. You got to be sure about your second round tight end. But that argument doesn't really hold, because if we look at last season, at least in like other rounds, 2, 3, and 4, look at last season. Kelce, Waller, Kittle, Pitts. Those were the tight ends that went off the board in the first 4 rounds. And you could argue that they all at least disappointed, not necessarily busted, but all of them disappointed. I mean, Kelsey had a down year by his standards, and especially coming at a cost of a first-round pick. Waller was only healthy for like the 9 games that I said before, and you could argue that even in those games, he wasn't fully healthy. He was injured for most of the season. Kittle missed about a month of the year while also producing his lowest yards per game since his rookie season. Pitts only scored 1 touchdown and then finished well below average, at least in terms of like his ADP compared to points per game. He really did not hit his ADP. But despite this, despite all of them having kind of down years, all 4 of them ranked inside the top 8 in terms of most valuable tight ends at getting your team into the playoffs. All 4 finished in the top 8. And again, you could argue they all had kind of down years, especially when you compare their production to what it took to get them. And even Kelsey, he was the second most valuable tight end at getting you to the championship behind Mark Andrews. And that's just kind of insane to think about. Like, even in a down year for tight ends in the first 4 rounds, they're still amongst the most valuable at the position, even factoring in what it took to get them. That's how awful late round tight ends are. I mean, you could say, oh, wow, like they had down years, but like you could have gotten something else. Could you have? I mean, the tight ends 12 plus last season are like Logan Thomas, Hunter Henry, Zach Ertz, Fant, Tunyon, Kmet, Njoku, Jonnu Smith, Everett, Ingram, Austin Hooper, Albert O, Hayden Hurst, like Azoma. Like, it's awful. You know, we know who the good tight ends are. Very few breakout beyond that. At running back, you're going to see people get injured, backups come in and dominate. At wide receiver, you're going to see some rookies break out, some second and third year options explode that we didn't expect that to happen. You're not going to see an injury at tight end and some other tight end come out there and post like top 5 numbers. It's just not going to happen. There are very few breakout tight ends. Last season, we had Dawson Knox and Dalton Schultz, 2 breakout tight ends, had phenomenal seasons. You were able to get both of them very, very late. But even then, Schultz was less valuable than all 4 of the guys I just mentioned. Knox was the 4th most valuable tight end last season. He was the true breakout, but he was barely ahead of Kelsey, barely ahead of Pitts, and behind George Kittle. And remember, that's taking into account teams that got Knox probably got him off free agency. So they got him for free, and he had a phenomenal year, and still, he was basically just as valuable just grabbing a top 4 option, even with a lot of them not really working out. Early tight end is optimal, and it remains a good move even when these players don't hit their ceiling, which is something people do not understand. And honestly, something I didn't really know before doing this research. Conventional thinking is that if they bust or don't have a phenomenal season, you're tanked. I mean, your team is just going to be awful, and people kind of will justify that with maybe Darren Waller last season, be like, oh, well, I didn't win the championship because of this. Honestly, it wasn't really because of that. Yes, he produced a below average playoff rate, but it wasn't that low, and it was way higher than some options late in drafts that worked out just fine, just because they're giving you access to such an incredible weekly ceiling. And even when they bust, they're still producing pretty good numbers, which you need at the position because everyone else is terrible. So good idea to take them in rounds 2 through 4. Not a good idea to take them in middle rounds. And then late on, it's fine. It's whenever you see a big value, whenever there's one that you really want to target. It's not super important after round 9 when exactly you take your first. But that's your first. What about your second tight end? Thankfully, the data here also backs up our general thoughts that we had before. If you take an early tight end, so that's like the top 4 rounds, you have an above average playoff rate if you do select a late round tight end, like select someone in the double digit rounds, but you also do if you just don't draft anyone. And that's what my lean would be. The odds that you end up drafting a breakout tight end late and you end up using them or like trading them for something really valuable is relatively low. I would say if you used an early round pick at tight end and you don't have some unbelievable value late, you're better off trying to draft a breakout running back, taking maybe your second quarterback later on, taking, a rookie wide receiver that you think can have a high season or a high ceiling this season, have a true breakout. You're better off doing that than grabbing another tight end that you're very, very unlikely to use. And if you do end up using them, it's probably because your early round pick didn't work out, which isn't that great of a situation to be in. So early tight end, don't take one late. Middle tight end, it is 50-50. There is no lean in the data. I guess technically the very, very, very slight lean was that take your second tight end in rounds 11 through 15 if you selected a mid-round tight end, but it's so marginal that I would just say now you're just going off your feel. If there is a late round tight end that you absolutely love and you really want to get them on your team because you think they're going to break out and then they come out as a value, like, do it. You're not hurting your team by taking a mid-round tight end and taking your favorite option late. It is not going to hurt you. But it's also not going to hurt you if you drafted someone in like the 6th round and then you just decide, I don't like any tight ends late, I'm not going to take any of them. That is absolutely fine to do. The final scenario is when you go in the double-digit rounds, when you didn't find a value early, you don't want to take a tight end in the middle rounds. Now you're stuck in the late rounds and you're like, ugh, like these guys aren't fantastic. I like some of them. Some of them are young, athletic tight ends that could break out. But let's be honest, the hit rate is very, very low for tight end in the later rounds. If you find yourself in that situation, it is optimal to double dip, take 2 tight ends in rounds 10 plus. It's something that I've honestly wondered for a while because part of the thinking with waiting this long is that, oh, okay, I can basically spend early picks on quarterback, running back, wide receiver. I can get incredible depth at running back, incredible depth at wide receiver. If I can just get a tight end, that'll be fine, be like 9th or 10th in points per game, just get by every week, then I can spend 1 pick there, load out everything else, and I'll be good to go. But then the other thinking is, well, it's difficult to do that. Sure, it's wonderful if that works out. If you happen to draft, Schultz or Knox last season, good on you. I mean, that's fantastic. You probably did really well, but it's hard to do that. And so I think the data is kind of showing if you have to wait and take your first tight end in rounds 10 plus, give yourself at least a better chance of hitting, especially because we're going to know early in the season. You draft 2 tight ends late. They come out there. One of them has 2 targets in the first week, 1 catch for 7 yards. Well, you just drop that tight end. You add whoever's hot on free agency. It doesn't hurt you all that much, but give yourself that opportunity. Maybe it takes you 2 picks. Maybe your second favorite option is the one that works out. Just give yourself a little bit of a better chance of hitting at a position that's very difficult to hit on late. So again, early tight end is still better, but if you happen to wait, not target 1 in the middle rounds, just grab 2 and lean upside, lean good offenses, lean youth but not rookie, younger players, athletic players. That's going to give you the best chance of hitting on a breakout. So there are plenty more graphics on the website. I only showed like 1 or 2 on screen. Plenty more graphics on the website if you're curious at doing a deeper dive into the tight end position, into tight end draft strategy, or honestly any other positions draft strategy as well. Next week, we'll take a deep dive into the early rounds and go over for all the positions, what should we be doing in the first 4 or 5 rounds? I don't know what the cutoff's going to be. First 4 or 5 rounds of the draft. What is the best overarching draft strategy? So make sure you're subscribed and click the little bell icon so the videos show up on your homepage. I posted a big update to the rankings earlier this week, so make sure you check that out at my website, thefantasyfootballadvice.com. That, my friends, is the end of this one. Hope you all enjoy. If you did, how about hitting the like button? And how about subscribing to the channel if you're new here? Thanks for watching.